recording this on March 24th, 2022. We're going to talk about the biggest what-ifs from the Showtime era of the Lakers, one of the absolute richest eras in the history of basketball. We would do an all Lakers one, but the Lakers are kind of the standard of the NBA. They have a lot of championships, especially from this period of history where basketball, really the popularity of the sport we know today, really began. And this era has come up a lot lately because of the HBO show Winning Time, based on the book Showtime by Jeff Pearlman, who's wrote some great books on the 90s Cowboys, Brett Favre, Walter Payton, the 80s Mets, and the Shaq and Kobe Lakers too. So this was just a really wild time in the NBA where anything goes. So we want to share some of our favorite nuggets from the book and from that Showtime era. So the way it works is we'll look at some of these scenarios. We'll explain them for what they are and what could have been had things gone a little bit differently. So Khaled, we have a list here. I'll hand it to you first. What's number one on the list?
So it's fair to say, or it's pretty safe to say, that without Magic Johnson, there is no Showtime. There's no Showtime Lakers. There's no Lakers dynasty in the 1980s, and there probably isn't, the NBA as we know it. And what's crazy is that it was literally a coin flip away from not happening. So ahead of the draft, where the Lakers selected Magic Johnson, the Bulls and the Lakers had a coin flip to decide draft position, draft order. And it came out after that if the Bulls won the coin toss, Magic Johnson would have actually gone back to school for another year. He didn't want to play in the cold, and the Bulls were not the marquee franchise that we know today. So this is a good what if for both teams, of course, because if, maybe Magic gets convinced to go to Chicago and he gets to turn around that franchise before Michael Jordan, and he becomes the greatest Bull of all time versus the greatest Laker. And of course, for the Lakers, if they don't win that coin toss, they don't get Magic, they don't get all of the above. So I think it's an underreported thing. I don't think it's really like a big part of the Magic story. But did you know about this when it, obviously not at the time, but did you know about this going back to Magic's history?
Yeah, having been born in 1989, I remember it like it was yesterday. No, I read the book before the show came out, so I learned about it pretty recently. And it's funny, right? In hindsight, when you see how archaic some things are. I mean, it's not like they're doing anything, reinventing the wheel with ping pong balls right now when they figure out the lottery. But they were doing it with a coin flip. They're like, all right, guys, do you call heads or tails, like it was the kickoff to the Super Bowl?
I mean, the NFL still does a coin flip, right?
They do? Really?
Yeah.
I don't know anything.
They still do. I think, I don't know, a few years ago, I think the Niners and Raiders had the same record. They had this similar, I think they do overall record, conference record, division record, blah, 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 all these tiebreakers. And it literally came down to a coin flip. If you meet all these criteria, at the end of the day, they might just have to flip a coin to decide who drafts first. So it's archaic, but the NFL still does it.
If the NFL is doing it, I have an idea. NBA, televise the coin flip.
Oh, the drama. And you can get like a special commemorative coin, maybe auction it off or sell replicas. I could see it happening.
Make it an NFT or some shit. Yeah.
NBA Top Shot, number one selling Top Shot.
Yeah, it's crazy. He didn't want to play in Chicago. Chicago wasn't anything significant at the time, and he wanted to be in the sun. He wanted to be, as the author described it, women in wallet-sized bikinis. So he said, "There's no way I'm going to play in Chicago." And interestingly, at the time, Jerry West was running the Lakers as the head coach, and he actually didn't want Magic Johnson. He didn't think that a guy at 6'9" could play point guard. He wanted Sidney Moncrief, right? Tell us a little more about Sidney Moncrief.
Well, before we do, it's kind of crazy to think of Jerry West as like anti-innovation, right? Because tradition says, if you're 6'9", whatever, 220 pounds, whatever Magic was, you're going to play the 4. Maybe you play the 5 if you're a little stronger than anything, or than some of these other guys, but you're traditionally going to play power forward. But Magic, being a point guard, being this big, I guess Jerry West couldn't see the vision. But this is also the same guy that saw the NBA becoming more of a shooter's league and not trading Klay Thompson for Kevin Love. And he's the architect behind, some the Warriors dynasty and some of these great Clipper teams that we've seen in recent years. So, yeah, I guess that's a negative for Jerry West. But, yeah, he was not convinced about Magic Johnson. He wanted Sidney Moncrief, who was a more traditional size point guard / two guard, 6'3", 180. So that's what you usually see in a point guard. And to his credit, I mean, Moncrief was a good player. He's a 5-time All-Star with the Milwaukee Bucks. He played for about 10 years. He's a Hall of Famer, so he's a great player, but he's obviously not a top 10 all-time player like Magic Johnson. So another, coin flip possibly type situation. We know Jerry Buss fell in love with Magic Johnson. He saw the vision of Showtime and run and gun and all that stuff with Magic leading the way, but it could have been an interesting situation if they drafted Sidney Moncrief instead.
They let anyone into that Hall of Fame. Sidney Moncrief's in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, I mean, so is Mo Cheeks. So is, Dwight Howard's probably a future Hall of Famer.
Dwight Howard won Defensive Player of the Year 3 times. Stupid calendar. He won Defensive Player of the Year 3 times in a row. I mean, he was incredible.
Yeah, he's just like he's a kind of a punchline, and he deserves being like the top 75 list and all that stuff too. But yeah, they're definitely not as stringent as the NFL is with their requirements. But again, he's a 5-time All-Star. He played for a long time. So, I mean, you definitely don't think Hall of Fame when you think of Sidney Moncrief, but
He averaged 15 points a game. I think Mitch Richmond's in the Hall of Fame. Shout out Golden State. But
yeah, there's a lot of guys you're like, really? Him?
Yeah, really?
That guy? I mean, they count like college, they count Olympic stuff. I think Ryan Russillo always says if you have to talk about a guy's Olympic achievements and the gold medals as like a justification for him getting into the Hall, then he doesn't deserve it. And I think that's a pretty good criteria.
Yeah.
But I mean, Moncrief, 5-time All NBA too, 5-time All Defensive Team, 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. So he's got the credentials. But again, he's no Magic Johnson.
Yeah, I think the clear-cut what if for this is if they don't get Magic Johnson, the Lakers are nowhere near what they are today. They were absolutely the team of that decade. And every sport kind of has a team that runs every decade. The Lakers were the team that dominated the most in the 80s, the Bulls in the 90s, the Lakers again in the 2000s a little bit. So, this is a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely worked out for the better. All right.
Let's go on to the next one here. So that was in 1980. In 1986, it's more so, what if the Lakers traded James Worthy and Byron Scott for Roy Tarpley and Mark Aguirre?
Yeah, that name always throws me off.
Yeah.
Because with this Latin pronunciation, you think it's
Aguirre.
But I think his grandfather, I was reading about him, his grandfather is from Mexico, so maybe it's supposed to be Aguirre, but he just decided to switch it up on us. But yeah, this is a good one. It's from the book. I mean, it's the reasoning behind this trade that was on the table was a big part of it was Magic was great buddies with Aguirre. So he was kind of the shadow GM of the Lakers, and he was really pushing for that trade. But I think it was Jerry West that pulled the plug on it. So give him credit. He didn't want Magic, but he knew that this trade wasn't the right decision for the Lakers.
Yeah, he pointed out that, yes, Mark Aguirre, I think growing up in California makes you want to say Aguirre, but he knows that Mark Aguirre was a talented player, but he was kind of like a me-first guy. He was going to demand the ball, mess up the chemistry of Showtime. They were really good competing back and forth with the Celtics in the middle of the 80s and didn't think that he would fit in. And obviously James Worthy was a number one pick that they were very fortunate to get just a couple of years earlier. That was a really important part of the Lakers run in the 80s. So yeah, I agree with Jerry West here. And they had other options at that time, but I think that this was a good call. Even the whole James Worthy selection could have been Dominique Wilkins, if I'm not mistaken. And that's, a different conversation. It seems like Jerry West was set on the James Worthy selection and trading for Byron Scott.
Yeah, Dominique went third in that 1982 draft. I think with James Worthy, it took him a little while to get started. He only started one game his rookie year, even though he made, the all rookie team. It just took him a while to get warmed up, which I think is expected, right? If you're the number one pick, you're coming to a team with huge personalities. You've got Kareem and Magic and all these guys. So it's going to be hard to find your place, especially when you're coming from a situation at UNC where you're, the best player, you're the alpha, and you have to kind of learn how to defer to these other guys. But yeah, ultimately it was the right decision because James Worthy becomes a key part of, the later championship runs. And then of course, Byron Scott was just as important to those runs. And both those guys end up winning, 2 or 3 rings or 3 rings each with the Lakers.
And I think what kind of inspired or motivated West to stay away from Aguirre, because he was so dead set on chemistry, is they traded for a player named Maurice Lucas, who they had brought on as a bruiser to kind of similar to Kurt Rambis, just beat the shit out of the other team's players. But Maurice Lucas was very self-centered. He was consistently frustrated. He never seemed to really get the bigger picture. And I think he just didn't want that in the locker room again, or even risk the chance of it being in the locker room again.
That was an ongoing theme in this era, was trying to find those kind of auxiliary parts to, you have the core, you got the dynamic duo, Kareem and Magic, and you're trying to find complementary pieces. And because it was the NBA in the 80s, if it wasn't a guy who had like personality issues, there was guys that had drug issues because cocaine was such a prevalent thing. So it was just trying to find the right puzzle pieces. And there's, I think, a lot more failures than successes when it comes to those guys and trying to fit them in. But ultimately, like we said, they made the right decision, of course, by not making that trade. And I think it's a good segue to the third what if and what happened in 1989. So do you want to tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so in 1989, the Lakers had already won 2 championships in a row. They were going for a three-peat. It's funny because three-peat was coined by a different player on the Lakers. His name escapes me right now.
I think it was Norm Nixon, or was it? No, it was Wes Matthews.
It was Wes Matthews.
Wes Matthews
right.
Sr.
Wes Matthews Sr. Had said it. We're going to three-peat. Pat Riley said, "I like that," and he goes and he gets it patented. He gets three-peat patented. And Wes Matthews was like, I couldn't believe he freaking patented it after I said it, which was just a fun nugget that gets buried again in history. But so they're looking to three-peat. And the what if here is, what if Magic Johnson doesn't get hurt in that series against the Pistons? Do the Lakers three-peat? And it's an interesting part of this because going into that, they had a pretty tough series not tough enough, according to Pat Riley, series with the Phoenix Suns. And he wanted them to destroy the Pistons. The Pistons were a bit of an irritant in the 80s. They were a tough team too. And they wanted to kill the Pistons. But where Pat Riley went wrong, he kind of set himself against his own team as a bit of a dictator. They were doing these really hard scrimmages, and they were like, this isn't training camp. The players were saying, like, this is upsetting us, how hard we're working. We didn't really need to work this hard. Even the personal trainer, Gary Vitti, said, like, it was a boot camp, but I didn't criticize him for it. Look at him. He's Pat Riley. You have to assume he knows what he's doing. And then the first reality check hit them during a box out drill. Instead of just doing some light shooting, he's like, we're going to do this box out drill. And Byron Scott, who was a very important piece on the team, ends up tearing his hamstring. And he was out for the playoffs. Did you know about that?
I did, yeah. And I think by that point, Pat Riley was kind of an egomaniac, right? He was running the team like a dictator. He was starting to get the disease of Moore that he talks about, right? That we talked about before the pod. And it was starting to affect him. He started to think that he was the driver behind the success. And I think that's a common theme that we see in pro sports, where GMs or coaches start to think that they're the ones that are ultimately responsible for the success of the team, even if, they don't give the players enough credit. So I did know about the Byron Scott injury, and I know that there was another injury to Magic Johnson. And they thought it was because Pat Riley was working these guys too hard. Of course, this is before the era where, we talk about rest and sports science and all these things. So to him, he was probably like, we're going to be tougher and in better shape than the other team. And we're going to do so by beating the shit out of each other in practice.
Yeah, and it ended up being the exact opposite. They were tuning him out. They resented him by the time the game started. They resented him more than they resented the Pistons by the time the finals started. They started tuning him out, and a lot of times when dynasties end, you see this a lot. I remember most recently, you had Golden State when Kevin Durant was there, kind of tuning out Steve Kerr and running his own offense at times. You had Pep Guardiola being tuned out by the Barcelona players at the end of his run there. So that's kind of like a telltale sign of something coming to an end. And it happened. They were in the second game, I believe, first or second game, in the third quarter. Isaiah Thomas pushed the Pistons up to take the lead, and then next thing you know, Magic Johnson is grabbing his left hamstring, and he comes back the next game, plays for 4 minutes at the Forum in LA, and then they take him out, and that was it. They got swept by the Pistons.
It was a beatdown by of epic proportions, and I mean the Pistons were obviously no joke. They ended up repeating the next year. So they were obviously a great team. They're all the way up. And I think one of the reasons that I said it was a segue into or from the previous one about James Worthy and Mark Aguirre is that the Pistons famously traded for Mark Aguirre, and he went against that reputation that he had of being that me first scorer. And he ended up being a real gritty type player for the Pistons, where he wasn't too concerned about his own scoring. He deferred to Dennis Rodman, who was playing more and more ahead of him because of the things that he could do that Aguirre couldn't. So maybe if the Lakers traded for him, maybe he becomes that player for them. But ultimately, them not pulling that trigger gives the Lakers a few championships, but it also helps the Pistons win a couple championships as well.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of how I answer this question. I don't think they three-peat either way. It's really hard to do it. It's why you don't really see it happen often in basketball. And the Pistons that decade, they went through the gauntlet. They were sick of everybody's shit. They had lost and suffered enough heartbreak that nothing was going to stop them. And I think Pat Riley wore this team out, and the Pistons just beat the crap out of them.
They're the most bitter back-to-back champs like ever. It's Isaiah being constantly disrespected by Michael Jordan and being kept off the dream team, and the reputation that they have of just being, they're bad boys. That's their nickname. And at the end of the day, like, people root for the bad guy, but not really. People want to root for the hero, the guy with the big smile, the knight in shining armor, and that's Magic Johnson. That's Larry Bird. That's Michael Jordan. That's not Isaiah Thomas and Bill Laimbeer and Dennis Rodman, like beating the shit out of guys every time they drive to the lane. So you're probably right. Even with a healthy Lakers squad, the Pistons were younger, hungrier, more physical in an era that allowed for that. So I think they do end up winning that series, even with a healthy Lakers team.
Absolutely. Anything else on this one?
No. So I think that's it for the what ifs. I think you have one more about our buddy Paul Westhead.
Yeah. So Paul Westhead, I want to go back in time for a minute. Paul Westhead ended up taking over for the team after Jack McKinney, who had kind of created the whole Showtime formula. In a freak accident, falls off of his bike, hits his head, and is unable to physically coach. So Paul Westhead uses the Jack McKinney system, and they won the title that year. In very impressive fashion against the Philadelphia 76ers. So the following season, he abandons that formula. He ends up this strange system where everyone would just run to a spot and then just see if their number is called during that possession. Oh, is it my turn? Oh, is it Kareem's turn? the players hated it, and they were embarrassingly eliminated by the Houston Rockets in the first round the year after they won the championship, where Moses Malone, who I would say is one of the most underappreciated legends in NBA history, just took Kareem to the woodshed, putting 30 points and 15 rebounds a game or something on the Lakers. And they went 7-4 the following season after losing to Houston, and he was fired for Pat Riley.
I mean, Jerry Buss never scared to pull the trigger and then take a gamble. And yeah, so maybe if he doesn't get a big ego, doesn't think that he's the disease of me, the disease of more. If he doesn't think that I'm the one that's driving this success, maybe we don't get Pat Riley. Maybe we don't get the dynasty across the 80s with Pat Riley leading the way. Maybe again we don't get Pat Riley leading the New York Knicks back to relevance, and then of course the Miami Heat later on to a couple championships. So that's a hell of a what if. One interesting nugget about Paul Westhead: he might be the only coach. I'm going to take a stab here, just take a guess that he's the only coach to win a championship in the NBA and the WNBA.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he won the championship with the Phoenix Mercury in 2007.
Oh, well, that's what did he do? Did he use the same system, or did he play Showtime? What did he do?
Well, hopefully he wasn't quite as restrictive, and they had a great team. Diana Rossi, probably the best women's player of all time. Maybe you prefer Sue Bird, but yeah, maybe he learned his lesson from trying to lasso Magic Johnson and Kareem and just let the players do their thing. So,
oh, what a front runner! He got the GOAT on his team. That's what happened.
that's a good trivia question. Who's the only coach in basketball history to win? I'm going to fact check that because it sounds right, but who knows?
It's a huge interesting what if, because if he doesn't make that blunder, he sticks to that system that just carved up the NBA. Maybe we don't get the Pat Riley that's a top 15 coach of all time. You don't get the Armani suits and the Miami culture that's irrelevant today.
Hashtag we back, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Pat Riley became a dynasty across 3 decades in his own right, in different organizations. So it's a huge one.
Yeah, he's an absolute icon. The signature look with the hair and the suit. I always thought he was Italian, but I guess he's Irish. I think maybe it was the look, the slick back hair and stuff. I thought it was an Italian mobster type, but he's Irish.
Tremendous hair.
All right. So I think that's it for the what ifs. So we also wanted to call out a few, crazy nuggets and funny things that I noticed, or we both noticed from the book. If you haven't read it, I know you don't want to spoil the ending of the Showtime series on HBO, but it's great stuff that it obviously is not, there's not enough time in the world to cover all the great nuggets that we've seen. So yeah, you want to start with your first great nugget from the book?
Yeah. So the first little nugget is a playoff game against the Sonics in 1980 at the University of Washington gym that they had to play thanks to a Mariners game and the Ice Capades as well. So it was the 8,000 seat arena that was used usually for intramural games. What is that?
It's just like, intramural college sports where it's like, it's not, it's just, you just sign up and play. It's not quite pickup, but it's organized by the school. And it gives you an idea of the era of the NBA that we were dealing with in 1980. This was the era of like tape delayed playoff games, of coach travel, like economy travel. These guys were not making all that much money. And the fact that Magic Johnson made, I think, he got a deal worth $500K a year, and it was like the craziest thing ever. So it's a nice little time capsule. The fact that they were forced out of the arena or the stadium because the Sonics used to share an arena or stadium with the Mariners, and they couldn't use the other arena in downtown Seattle because of the Ice Capades. So that tells you where the NBA was in the hierarchy of pop culture there.
Man, Magic Johnson. 500,000. His contract with Jerry Buss was a 25 years, $25 million.
I do. And it was like it was the biggest controversy. Like, this is an absurd amount of money for that, for that. And then you get, I don't know, Tristan Thompson making 20 million a year. Like, it's nothing.
John Hollinger gave Chandler Parsons $94 million. How about that?
One of the all-time finessers in NBA history.
Why don't you help guide us through the second nugget here?
So the second one is so we talked about how the Lakers were always looking for those auxiliary pieces to fit with Magic and Kareem, and one of those guys was Spencer Haywood, who was a good player, but he had a dark past and a dark history of drug addiction, and essentially, I believe it was during the '80 finals or '81 finals, Paul Westhead basically kicked him off the team. Because of those drug issues, he would show up to practice, high off his ass or coming down off a high, and he's just not a functional member of the team. And Spencer Haywood did not appreciate that. And he was apparently in the process of trying to get Paul Westhead killed by hiring some old buddies from his neighborhood. And I think his mom caught onto it on a phone call and helped, convince him not to do it. But Westhead and Haywood had a funny interaction several years later after Haywood cleaned up his act, where, Westhead thanked him for not succeeding because, he's still alive thanks to that. So that was the NBA in the 80s, cocaine and hitmen and trying to get your coach killed.
It is a wild, wild story. I was shocked after reading this, and Westhead was like, I didn't have an earthly idea. Like, I could have been killed, and no one would have known. I would have known. It would have been a successful hit.
This would have been like Draymond calling, some hitmen from Saskatchewan, not Saskatchewan. Where is he from?
Saginaw.
Somewhere. Saginaw, same thing. And saying, hey man, Steve Kerr played Festus Ezeli and Anderson Varejao in Game 7 of the NBA Finals. Can you take out his brakes or something?
Cut the brake line. Yeah.
Cut the brakes on his Tesla.
He wanted to kill him for being kicked off the team for being a cokehead. Yeah. Crazy.
The next one I got, it's nothing crazy. It's just a one that I appreciated as a Raiders fan. So during the 88 or 89 finals, apparently Al Davis felt a special kinship with the Detroit Pistons because of the whole bad boy image. And he sent them a bunch of silver and black sweaters or varsity jackets, something like that, to show his appreciation for the things they did. And he also helped had his training staff help the Pistons with Isaiah's ankle injury during those finals. So just a funny thing, Al Davis was not one for, civic pride and the kinship of being LA teams along with the Lakers. He didn't give a shit about any of that. And he just loved the bad boys. So that was just a little one for me.
No, that's cool. Al Davis stories that sprinkled across history.
Yeah, man, the guy was everywhere.
This is an interesting one. And for me, it was shocking because I had heard this about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but it was very well reported in this book, or heavily reported, that he was an asshole. And I'd heard that he was an asshole, but the book gives several reasons into it. There was a lot of racism he had experienced throughout his life. He didn't really trust coaches. And it was pretty funny. There's like a nugget about a kid saying, Mr. Kareem, you're my favorite player. And he says, kid, go fuck yourself. Like, he didn't have any regard for how he spoke to fans or anyone like that. I think there was another one where a guy said, oh my God, my wife just had a baby or something, and you're our favorite player. And he says, I don't care. And they're like, yeah, they call him, the N-word. And he goes, well, I'm glad that I didn't give them the autograph that they wanted. So he definitely felt that because he was famous is why people adored him, but he felt that a lot of it was disingenuous.
There's a story that Pearlman tells. I think when Kareem was in high school and he played at a majority white high school with a white coach, and I guess he was playing pretty poorly in the first half, and his coach at halftime, to try to get him riled up, says, Kareem, you're playing like an N-word. And of course that got a reaction out of Kareem, and he kicked ass in the second half. And the coach said, yeah, see, I knew what I was doing. I knew that I was going to motivate you by talking to you like that. And apparently after that, Kareem had real trust issues with any authority figures, with any coaches. Even John Wooden, who we know is kind of like a magical grandfatherly figure in college basketball. Kareem would say that, he felt that Wooden would treat him differently than his white players. Like, he was nice to him in practice and things like that, but, he just didn't feel that same connection. Maybe that was just, in his mind, but it makes sense, right? The guy was, he's a light-skinned black kid growing up in New York City, in the 50s and 60s. So it's understandable why he would be, skeptical about race and why he's treated so well by the white public. Because, if he wasn't a basketball player, he's definitely not getting treated this way. So, and it goes against everything that we see about Kareem now. He's like this big teddy bear, right? He's this old guy. He's so wise, and he's like a Yoda type figure, always, writing very insightful columns and on Medium and on his website and stuff, and trying to give guys advice. So I definitely didn't know that he had that reputation.
Yeah, I subscribe to his Substack. I like some of the stuff that he puts out. I do agree. He's like an old softie now. But one thing I wanted to discuss about this that just piqued my curiosity is, a lot of athletes today create their own path to telling their stories via podcasts, documentaries. You saw like The Last Dance. LeBron has The Uninterrupted and The Shop, and Durant has The Boardroom. And we saw, a lot of like The Last Dance, 30 for 30 was all Jordan's narrative. Even Magic Johnson has one coming out next month. But I think athletes are kind of sick of journalists speaking on their behalf. Although it's not absolute that all journalists are out obviously to ruin athletes via stories, but athletes do want their side to be a little more favorable and for their voices to be heard, and they feel misunderstood. And Jeff Pearlman, I thought, didn't pull punches in some of his criticisms of Kareem. I was a little surprised by it, but I guess I'm not used to his writing style. For example, he said Abdul-Jabbar, though he contributed to causes and read extensively and was, along with Nevitt, the most intelligent of Lakers, he possessed the emotional IQ of a toddler. So I guess my question is, like, what's your reaction to that? Like, obviously Abdul-Jabbar didn't like reporters. Is Pearlman's criticism a result of reporters not being held favorable in Abdul-Jabbar's eyes, or is it more to it than that?
I think it's definitely more to it than that, right? I mean, I think this was a different time, a different era where, Kareem was a big part of, the athletes taking part in the civil rights movement. So him and Jim Brown, Muhammad Ali, there was a lot going on in the country, a lot of things that he was upset about and had, very good reason to be upset about. So you can understand why he was kind of cynical and skeptical about everything, and why, he could just see that he was like the opposite of Magic, right? Magic kind of was like OJ, right? He's like, he was kind of existed outside, or he thought he existed outside of like the bounds of race. Like, I'm not black, I'm OJ. So Magic didn't say those things, but he's like, I'm not, black, I'm Magic. That's what people see me as. He wanted the love of the people. He appreciated the love of the fans. While Kareem had a very skeptical view of it, was, according to this book and according to some of the things that he said, was that, he understood that the reason that he's being approached for autographs was because of his fame, his talent. And if he was just another black dude walking around, he would not be treated this way. And that made him skeptical and he didn't trust anyone because of that. He always thought that people had an ulterior motive when trying to talk to him. And he didn't have time and the patience for these fans. He was just out there to win and, do his thing. And he's also just such a unique character during that time, right? He was like openly Muslim. He changed his name to a very Muslim name. He was one of the first athletes to do yoga, and talk about it as some of the benefits to his game. So he was just an interesting guy. And I think that if he did have his own outlet, maybe he could have explained himself a little bit better, talk about why, like he does now, right? With the Substack and these other mediums that he has. He could have talked about why he's so upset. He could have voiced his opinion on these issues and talked about these things and maybe explained why he was such a grouch. And of course, like I said, he had a lot of good reasons to be grouchy.
Yeah, that's well said. I agree. I think it is more of just a period thing. It happened in the 80s, and if Kareem existed today, I think the narrative would be very different.
For sure. And even the way we talk about athletes now versus back then, I mean, now we talk about athletes' mental health and giving them, the grace to not to fail so much, but just to be themselves and to, be, I don't know if emotional is the right word, but basically back then it was, shut up and dribble. You shouldn't have opinions on these things. You should be grateful that you are, rich and young and wealthy and successful and all these things. And look at all the great stuff that America has given you as a Black athlete. Well, now it's like, you can talk about those things and talk about the other side of that coin, and the fact that they still experience a lot of the racism and things that everyday Black people do. So, yeah,
So maybe Kareem's moody brooding was necessary for history as a result of him not feeling like he owed anybody shit because of what he went through growing up.
Yeah, and he definitely didn't,
All right. Next one here is Magic Johnson. This is my observation, is Magic Johnson's sex addiction. If he was reportedly having sex more than once a day. And there's a funny nugget in the book about it. Before we talk about that, were you surprised by how heavily reported it was? This guy was a freak?
Not at all. From what you knew about the NBA in that era and everything that we knew about the Showtime Lakers, I knew that Jerry Buss was like famous for being kind of like the Hugh Hefner of the NBA, this older guy that always had, two women like half his age or a third of his age on his arm. So it was just the era. It was like an extension of the disco era. It was the 80s. It was partying and cocaine and not quite free love, but just free sex everywhere you went. And it was like Magic Johnson picked up the mantle from what's the name? Wilt Chamberlain, right? As being like, the dog in the NBA. So I think hearing some of the details of like the shady details of the stories and the things that used to go down at Jerry Buss's house and at Magic's house and at the Playboy Mansion and all that stuff. And at the Forum Club, which was, for those who don't know, there was a nightclub in the same building where the Lakers used to play. And it became like the most exclusive nightclub in LA. Maybe even calling it a nightclub is generous. It's more like a sex club, given how exclusive and secretive it was. And this is the era before camera phones, before all this other stuff. So you could go there and nobody would know. People could say, "Oh, hey, I saw such and such player at the Forum Club," but if there's no cameras, nobody can prove
it. You could tell, like the way they're depicting him in this HBO show is like he already saw it from far away and was like, "Man, they're about to make me look like a freak." And he got a phone call from Apple and said, "Let's put out that documentary right away about me." And so I could tell my story and not look like a sex freak.
Yeah, let's talk about like the softer side of Magic.
Yeah, everyone loves Magic, not because of that. It's funny. There was the reports about Jerry Buss's parties at the mansion. And when Magic would host his parties, they would have this rule where like everyone that attended the party has to be gorgeous. All the women have to be by unanimous consensus gorgeous. And every man and woman by midnight has to be having sex or have plans to. And if they're not, he would run up to them and go, "What's going on? Why aren't you getting busy? Everyone's supposed to get busy. It's Magic's party."
It's a different era, right? There's no Me Too. There's no, concept of, all this other stuff, I guess, that we talk about now. And it's crazy, man. You think about what we think of Magic now he's like, again, this big cuddly teddy bear. He's a great businessman. He has, funny tweets where he's not purposely being funny. He's funny on accident. And you don't think of him as this player, right? The most eligible bachelor, even though I think he was in a relationship at the time, but that didn't seem to matter to any of the players because of the amount of women and such that they used to spend time with. So
there's a funny story in the book about how I forget who it was in the Lakers organization had their car in the shop. So Magic let him drive his Mercedes. And when he was driving it around doing some errands, something under the hood exploded. So he calls and he says, Magic, I got some bad news, man. Your car blew up. And his response was, were you able to save that phone number of that girl that was in the glove compartment? He's like, Magic, listen, your $40,000 car is sitting in the middle of the street on fire. And he's like, forget about it, man. I'll have someone pick it up later. Did you save that number?
I mean, it's a credit to them, like for still being the dynasty of the 80s with all these distractions.